Yes. Sorry. Thank you, Angela. I hadn't seen your message. I will start from the beginning. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming out to today. Our program. Can you hear us now? Do you still have no sound?
Yeah, now we are able to hear.
Okay, good. Okay. Sorry for the error. So, we still have people saying no sound in chat. Okay, there's now feedback. I have everything muted on my end. One moment, I'm going to restart the stream. Oh, Angela's saying yes, it's working. Okay. I think... Alright, I'm going to restart the stream just to make sure that we get rid of any of that feedback. Okay. Alright, let me turn off the fan as well. Okay. We'll get there eventually. Thank you for all your patience. Okay. I think it's working. All right. Like I was saying before, thank you everybody for coming out to today's program on the sacred sites of Flushing. Today's program is brought to you by the Queens Historical Society and also in partnership with the Landmarks Preservation. Today we'll be going over Flushing's history and relationship with religious freedom and all of the different sites that are considered sacred around Flushing. Okay, it was the fan. So, Flushing, one of the earliest colonies in Queens, having been founded as a Dutch colony in 1654, has long been the site of various different religions, all living in harmony. However, Flushing's famous relationship with religious freedom has not always been as simple. So before we take our tour around Flushing's sacred sites, let's look at some of the historical context. When Flushing was founded by the Dutch, then known as Vlissingen, it was part of New Amsterdam, and it went through a series of leaders, or director generals, as appointed by the trading company, the Dutch West India Company. One of the most famous of these director generals was Peter Stuyvesant. One of the ways that Stuyvesant ran the colony was with a stubborn and aggressive will against all religions that were not his own, Dutch Reformed. This meant that as people came to the colony as it grew, they could face discrimination or violence at Stuyvesant's hand. We have a few prominent examples of this violence. In 1654, two Jewish traders settled in Amsterdam, joined by refugees from Brazil. Stuyvesant was highly against the presence of Jews in his colony and wanted to expel them. However, the board of directors of the Dutch West India Company thought that this would be unfair and forced him to let them stay. But in 1656, a cobbler from Rhode Island came to Flushing, and he began to baptize people in the East River. Stuyvesant thought him as a Baptist and promptly threw him out of the colony. In 1657, Stuyvesant prevented Lutherans from founding a church in New Amsterdam. This was met with resistance from Stuyvesant's board of directors again, who forced him to rescind that order that had blocked the Lutherans. Also in 1657, the first Quakers arrived by boat. Due to the Quakers' customs, such as not taking off one's hat or being very flamboyant in their preaching style, thus the name Quakers, Stuyvesant was offended by their presence, and the Quakers who had come were promptly sent away. When another Quaker, Robert Hodgson, started preaching in New Amsterdam, he was quickly arrested. Stuyvesant had him bound and dragged by cart to be thrown into a dungeon, then tried and convicted him, all without the ability to defend himself. and he was then sentenced to manual labor. Upon refusing the sentence, he was whipped near to death and then sent to Rhode Island. Stuyvesant was now very annoyed with the Quakers and their flamboyance, so he passed a law that would give anybody caught harboring or giving passage to a Quaker a very stiff fine. This prompted a petition by the people of Flushing, known as the Flushing Remonstrance. This letter was meant to remind Stuyvesant that the law of love, peace, and liberty extended to all, including Jews, Turks, and Egyptians, as quoted in the Flushing Remonstrance. However, 4 of these signers were arrested and eventually would recant their support. In 1658, Stuyvesant declared March 13th a day of prayer to repent for the sin of religious tolerance. This is, of course, not the end of the Quakers' activity in Flushing. Stuyvesant would eventually learn that the Quakers were holding meetings in the house of John Bound. This led to his arrest in 1662, and upon his refusal to pay that assessed fine, he was sent to face trial in front of the Dutch West India Company in Holland. There, he argued his case that the governor's patent of the colony called for religious liberty, and the board of directors decided in Bound's favor, stating that trying to force the colonists' conscientiousness would discourage immigration. So in 1663, Stuyvesant was told to allow all sects of religion, which he reluctantly followed. The cultural landscape of Flushing would remain mostly Quaker for many years, but with the codification of religious freedom into the Bill of Rights, it welcomed people of all sects. It's also important to realize that the process of colonization and immigration had multiple effects on the religious makeup of Queens. The native population and the religious beliefs were pushed out, criminalized, and marginalized. Keep in mind that in many cases, Native American religious practices were banned until 1978, with the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. And issues with this law were not corrected until 1994, and even then there are still difficulties that Native American groups face when trying to repatriate religious artifacts and follow certain practices. There are still Native groups here in Flushing. The Matinecock tribe is still present and active in this community. It's also important to note that the enslaved people who were forcefully brought to this colony had religion as well. Many were forced to convert to Christianity, or pretended to. Some were already Christian, however, many were Muslim, as many as 30%, or they practiced African spiritual traditions. Today, the cultural makeup of Flushing has changed dramatically since the 1970s, and the religious landscape reflects that. As people bring their culture with them to Flushing, let's look at a couple of sites that can be found only a short distance away from the Queens Historical Society. There are so many, so we're only going to highlight a few. Give me just a moment while I switch over to that. Some slides. It seems I accidentally got rid of them. Here it is. And now I switch to window capture. Present. Oops. Sorry. A little bit of additional technical setup. And all right. Oops. So this is a picture of the Sikh Center here in Flushing. This Sikh Center of New York is located at 3817 Parsons Boulevard, and is one of 5 Sikh centers here in Queens. It's not only a place of worship, but it's also a place for the community to gather. built by Punjabi immigrants in 1972, and as well as being a site for religious worship, it also has the ability to host any immigrants who have just arrived to the United States. Here, at 14210 Sanford Avenue in Flushing, we have the First Baptist Church of Flushing, founded by Howard Osgood in 1857. The history of this church is well known for helping many immigrants. For example, in the first few decades of the opening of the church, it was helping Irish immigrants who had been hurt by the potato famine. The church also consists of 3 different congregations: the Chinese, Hispanic, and English congregations. Here is a picture of the Ha Na Ma Zen Center of New York. This is located at 14439 32nd Avenue in Flushing, and it's actually located in the back. So, this was founded in 1989 as a Korean Buddhist temple, and is found in Flushing, in the area of one of the largest Korean populations in America. This temple belongs to the Jogye, I might be saying this wrong, please forgive my pronunciation, Jogye Order of Korean Buddhism, which is the largest Buddhist organization in South Korea. It was founded by a nun named Dae-haeng Kun Sinim, and is part of a global organization, Ha Ma Sion Center. This temple is known amongst Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike for its colorful wooden eaves and exposed beams, and it stands in contrast to the surrounding suburban homes. This is the Annunciation Russian Orthodox Church, located at 4267 at 147th Street in Flushing. The church building was constructed in 1895 and was used by German Lutherans. However, in 1951, it came to be used by its present tenants, the Russian Orthodox Church. And it has thus become a meeting place and community center for the Flushing Russian community. The style of Orthodox churches, the building features its stunning icons of saints and sacraments in the windows and interiors. Here is the Masjid Hazrati Abu Bakr Siddiq at 14147 33rd Avenue. This is a mosque located in Flushing and was established in 1968 by Afghan, Turkestan, and Uzbek immigrants, and it was made as a community center for religious activities and events, such as praying at the 5 obligatory prayers and other lectures. The importance of the mosque's name is Abu Bakr comes from Islam's first caliph, or deputy of Prophet of God, after Prophet Muhammad, after he passed away, and Siddiq being an honorific title meaning truthful. Here is the St. George's Episcopal Church. The St. George Episcopal Church in downtown Flushing at 135 to 38th Avenue was chartered by King George in the few years before the War of Independence. However, it was founded by Father George Keith, who is an ex-Quaker Anglican. At first, the church congregation had only English people, but when immigrants were coming to New York, the church would sometimes take in more diverse congregations, like in the 1950s, when the immigration of Latino and Chinese immigrants increased in Flushing, and the church got involved with those communities. I believe it was also the first Catholic church in the area. Oh, no, it's an Episcopal church. Sorry, I'm thinking of a different one. And this is the Bound Street Community Church at 14311 Roosevelt Avenue. In 1851, many people withdrew their membership from the original Protestant Reformed Dutch Church of Flushing and joined with the others to create the first Congregational Church of Flushing. In 1974, 123 years after they split, the two congregations merged back together and formed the Bound Street Community Church, and associated with the United Church of Christ and the Reformed Church in America. The merger was caused by the rising Asian population in Flushing in the 1960s and 70s. Since there was no longer a dominant Anglo-Saxon Protestant population, they decided to combine forces. However, in 1978, a group of immigrants from Taiwan formed the Zion Christian Church to have church service in Taiwanese. They began meeting in the Bound Street Community Church and officially merged with the church in 1988 to form a unified bilingual congregation. There are many other churches present here in Flushing that are definitely of note, including that of the Macedonian AME Church, which has been displaced and is, I believe, now in Jamaica, but I feel is also important to mention because it is one of the first AME churches, or African Methodist Episcopal churches, to be founded in Flushing. It was one of the first three religious sites to be formed in Flushing, and was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So not only do we have these sites, but we're also joined by a couple of other sites who have taken the time to come out today, and they will also be sharing some of information about their sites with us. First, we're going to see a quick video from the Flushing Free Synagogue, and they're going to talk about their site. Let me switch over to the video.
Was established in 1917 and is the oldest Reformed synagogue in Queens and Long Island. So the synagogue has quite a lot of history. To put that in perspective, we've seen 2 pandemics, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the Great Recession. Flushing is also a neighborhood that has experienced something similar to what happened down on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The synagogue was founded by the Hebrew Women's Aid Society. The group provided comfort and aid to the small Jewish population living in Flushing at the time. Through their services, they saw a need to establish a religious school operating on liberal lines while focusing on making better Jews and better Americans. On October 31st, 1917, the Society sent out a letter asking recipients to attend a meeting to discuss the creation of a new school. It was estimated the cost would be around $500, or $10,000 today. By the end of the night, they raised $1,500. Pretty amazing. A lot of the donations came from wealthy Jewish merchants with businesses in Flushing. With their goal met and with the excess funds, it was suggested that the society establish a synagogue. And so, here we are today. Flushing is one of the oldest settlements in what is now New York City. It is also one of the original 3 colonial settlements comprising Queens. Flushing traces its roots to English settlers who received a patent in 1654 from Mr. Stuyvesant, governor of the Dutch colony. Early in the town's history, Flushing residents stood together in support of a local Quaker community to protest the religious intolerance of Governor Stuyvesant. They drafted a document called the Flushing Remonstrance. The document from 1657 remains as one of the earliest published defenses of freedom of religion in the United States. If you've been to Flushing, you'll notice the streets are named after various plants, but also 2 well-known horticulturists. During the 17th century, Flushing developed as a major center for horticulture. William Prince started Flushing's first nursery in 1737. Samuel Parson also had established a nursery in 1838. Parsons Nursery also provided trees to the city's first public parks, among them including Central Park and Prospect Park. As in the rest of Queens, Flushing's fortunes evolved with the improvements in transportation. The introduction of regular train service to New York City in 1854 led to the post-Civil War boom in luxury home construction for wealthy New Yorkers. the extension of the trolley lines into Flushing from 1888 to 1899 and the electrification of the Long Island Railroad helped turn Flushing into a commuter suburb. From the 1890s until the outbreak of World War I, Flushing saw its estates divided up into new suburban developments. Perhaps the biggest impetus to the growth of Flushing and Queens in general was the opening in 1909 of the Queensboro Bridge that connected Queens and Midtown Manhattan. Also significant was the extension of the IRT into the borough during the 1910s. Flushing was touted as a place where the home life, the social life, and the religious life are at their best. Over the next 2 decades, the population of Queens mushroomed by 750%. The boom continued well into the 1920s. Although the city's Jewish population was enormous, the pre-World War I Jewish population of Queens was quite small. In 1913, New York City's Jewish population was estimated at around 1.3 million. Of that number, only 23,000 lived in Queens. Synagogues played a major role in the life of New York City's Jewish population. By 1918, New York's Jewish population was estimated at between 1 and 1.5 million and was served by 700 synagogues. In that year, West Queens had just 1 synagogue in 1 building, while East Queens had 18 synagogues, only 5 of which had their own buildings. Flushing's first synagogue was most likely the Temple Gates of Prayer, a conservative synagogue established in 1902. The Free Synagogue of Flushing was the neighborhood's second. Much of Jewish immigration was stopped with the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924. It wasn't until post-World War II that Flushing's Jewish population started to take off again, with returning Army GIs buying homes and starting families, but also those seeking a suburban lifestyle. The post-war boom was considered to be the synagogue's golden years, with membership at its peak. Especially once the aftermath of the Holocaust was revealed, synagogues saw participation among Jews jump from 20% to 60%. So, here's the million-dollar question. What does it mean to be free? The Free Synagogue of Flushing took its name from the Free Synagogue, founded by Rabbi Stephen Wise in Manhattan. It all started when in 1905, Rabbi Wise was approached to become the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel, perhaps New York City's wealthiest and most prominent Reform congregation. But he had run afoul of the congregation's leaders by giving a trial sermon on social justice and various progressive causes that directly challenged the thinking and doings of several prominent members. In the negotiations that followed, Wise insisted that if he took the pulpit, he would be free to speak his mind. The answer he received? The pulpit of Temple Emmanuel has always been and is subject to and under the control of the Board of Trustees. That meant that he could not accept the position, but he had already decided to create a new kind of synagogue, a free synagogue. In 1906, in an interview with the New York Tribune, Rabbi Wise laid out 3 core principles that are now a part of the Free Synagogue of Flushing's heritage. First, no assigned pews, a democratic arrangement which recognizes the equality of all worshipers and does not discriminate in favor of position or wealth. Second, no fixed dues. The synagogue is supported by voluntary contributions, members being expected to contribute in accordance with their means. And finally, a free pulpit. The occupant of the pulpit, regular or visiting, has the complete freedom of speech and assumes sole responsibility for their utterances. The congregation, on the other hand, having the right to accept or reject, in whole or in part, the message delivered. In a word, the synagogue, in its spirit and organization, is free, democratic, and liberal. Rabbi Wise intended to reach out to unaffiliated Jews. He envisioned the Free Synagogue as a place of moral instruction for Jews. His approach to the service included significant changes, such as the elimination of the Torah reading and the scheduling of Shabbat services on Sunday to supplement those traditionally held on Friday evening and Saturday morning. And that was because many workers didn't have the standard 2-day weekend until the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. But to Wise's mind, the most important aspect of the Free Synagogue would be its devotion to the cause of ethical teaching and social justice. Since 1917, the synagogue has always been a place of action. As you already know, one of the founding principles is freedom of the pulpit. This meant that we had many guest clergy from various religious backgrounds delivering sermons that addressed the needs of their community. And soon after, their needs became a focus of the Jewish community. Our pulpit has played host to many civil rights leaders, politicians, musicians, and many other personalities, savory and unsavory. Through social action, the synagogue has been a part of many historical events and moments that have shaped American society. From suffrage to war efforts, disease and famine, civil rights, worker rights, and gender equality. The synagogue has also hosted many outside organizations, providing them with space to pursue action. During the Great Depression, the synagogue was turned into a soup kitchen, and during World War II, the synagogue served as a casualty center for the Red Cross. And up until recently, we provided space for an abused women's group providing counseling. Most of their clientele were women from the Muslim faith. Eventually, they outgrew the space and moved on. Thanks to our new rabbi, Rabbi Gale, our synagogue is poised to become a sanctuary within a sanctuary, meaning that the Free Synagogue has become a sanctuary for counterculture. We are the antithesis of what we are seeing in today's society, which is bigotry, divisiveness, hatred, and prejudice. So that kind of gives you an idea of how far we've come as a congregation, but also where we're headed in the next 100 years. The experience made me rethink what sanctuary means today. The Free Synagogue of Flushing is comprised of two buildings. One is a pre-Civil War mansion, and the second a sanctuary built in the early 20th century. The Samuel Vernon Mann property is a 19th century mansion that the synagogue used for services in the early years and before moving into a new multi-purpose built sanctuary completed in 1927. In 1917, the congregation first met at the Odd Fellows Hall. Then, in 1921, the congregation acquired the Samuel Vernon Mann property. Their immediate plans called for the remodeling of the first floor of the homestead so that the building could be used as a place of worship. The Mann property is over 161 years old. It includes a large house, parts of which date back to 1859, but the building appeared to have been remodeled in the 1890s. Based on the evidence from historical maps, a frame house with a French-style roof and 2.5 stories tall was built on the site in 1859 for Flushing merchant Robert Carter. It was purchased in 1870 by Mary Hoffman, the wife of attorney and jurist Murray Hoffman. He's best known for the Hoffman Rule, which created a formula regarding property value and is still in use today. In 1891, the property passed on to Samuel Vernon Mann, husband to the daughter of the Onderdonk Cogswell family. Mann, a prominent currency broker, collected 18th century furniture. So it's probably at this time that the colonial revival style alterations to the house were made. In 1921, when Mann sold the house to the synagogue, the New York Times reported on the sale, describing the house as a 15-room house considered to be one of the best examples of Southern colonial architecture on Long Island. Today, the building houses our offices, our current religious school, and space for organizations providing community service. Between 1923 and 1930, Flushing's Jewish community quadrupled in size. It went from around 1,000 to over 4,000. By 1924, the newly acquired Mann Mansion was already too small for the growing congregation. In a letter from the congregation's president, Mr. Siemens explained the need for a new building. He said, "As a member of the congregation, you undoubtedly recognize that the last High Holy Day service, and since then, the need for larger quarters. In those services, there were 330 people, while our building only seats 120. Even on Friday evenings, often there have not been enough seats to accommodate our members. The Sunday school fills every nook and corner of the building to overflowing, not alone as to seats, but standing as well. So much so that our rabbi has announced that no more children may be registered, as they cannot be accommodated. The building committee requested that an architect by the name of Maurice Corlin prepare plans for the new facilities. The building would have a seating capacity of upwards of 650 in the sanctuary, and downstairs a social hall accommodating 400. The committee estimated that the cost of the new building would be approximately $165,000 to $175,000, around $2.6 million today. The total cost ended up being around $250,000. The Free Synagogue Sanctuary is an example of neoclassical revival style building. Its design is typical of early 20th century modern American synagogues, combining classical details with Jewish symbols. Above the main entrance to the colonnade, there's an English inscription from Isaiah, "For my house shall be a house of prayer for all people," a quotation particularly appropriate for the mission of the Free Synagogue. Inside the sanctuary is a large domed space without a separate gallery to serve as a women's section, reflecting the egalitarian theological position of the Reform movement. The leaded glass windows with Jewish themes add light to the space, while the crowning shallow dome that covers most of the space has a leaded glass skylight with a Jewish star in the center. Another feature of the synagogue includes a pipe organ, which became central to early Free Synagogue Sabbath services. The synagogue is one of only a few early surviving 20th century synagogues with a traditional pipe organ. Today, the sanctuary is still in use and hosts many Jewish life cycle rituals and celebrations. Up through the 1950s, Flushing still had a large Jewish presence. A long-serving rabbi said that when he had arrived at the synagogue, the membership included more than 500 families. Flushing had many Jewish-owned businesses, as well as delicatessens and kosher butchers, like the early days of the Lower East Side. In recent decades, however, while the Jewish population of Queens has grown enormously, the Jewish population of Flushing has declined significantly. As the population in Flushing evolved and the Jewish community changed, the Free Synagogue worked to adapt to the changing environment. The synagogue had to take a look at the cultural and social integration of American Jews, but also, what does a Jew look like today? Going on to 103 years, the Free Synagogue has been a bastion of liberal thought and social activism. The congregation continues to welcome all people, interfaith couples, straight, gay, every ethnicity and heritage, spanning the generations, with an elderly contingent as well as families with young children. Today, the synagogue remains a vibrant Reform congregation, drawing congregants from many parts of the borough. The synagogue reflects the history of Jews in Queens in the 20th century, especially the history of the Reform movement. The Free Synagogue remains a vital part of its living history, of its neighborhood, and of its city, and is intent on being a part of the neighborhood's future. Thank you for listening and learning about the synagogue's history. Please visit our website and take a virtual tour of our sanctuary. All right, bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, Sukes, for that video on the Flushing Free Synagogue. Sukes was not able to make it today, however. If you have any questions about the Flushing Free Synagogue, I can always pass them along to him to answer those for you. Next up, we have the Hindu Temple Society of North America, presented today with Ravi. And let's load up that video.
Namaste. Welcome to the Hindu Temple Society of North America, Flushing, Queens, in New York City. I wish to take everyone on a virtual tour of this temple as a walking tour, and I would also wish to show you some of the events, festivals, culturals of the temple. I hope everyone will enjoy this tour, and I'll also be pleased to answer any of your questions towards the end of the tour. Namaste. Thanks all.
In Hinduism, every endeavor starts with seeking the blessings of Lord Ganesha, the remover of all obstacles, the elephant-headed one, the god of beginnings. With this New York Ganesh temple being the first Hindu temple established in North America in the 70s, built according to the Agama Shastras, which are scriptures related to temple building, it is most fitting that the main deity in this place of worship is Lord Ganesha. Because this temple is located on the corner of Holly Avenue and Bound Street, we wish to take a moment to recognize Mr. John Bound, who lived roughly 350 years ago and was a proponent of religious freedom and tolerance. At this site, there was originally a Russian Orthodox church which outgrew the space, allowing this temple to come into existence on January 26, 1970. Every single stone you see here and all of the raw material came from India. This was constructed by sthapatis, artisans from India who used a hammer and chisel to handcraft all of the stonework. You can see the photos of the sthapatis carving each piece by piece, carefully selecting which stone should be used for which purpose and which location within the temple. The architect starts with a square, the shape that is a fundamental unit in sacred architecture of India. The circles that come from this form are the expanding energy shapes, signifying the movement and growth of life, with the square as a mark of order and perfection beyond life and death. After years of hard work, on July 4th, 1977, the temple had its first Kumbhabhishekam, consecration ceremony, opening its doors to the public for worship. And from those humble beginnings in which worship started in a single 2-bedroom house, now stands this magnificent temple that spans over 120,000 square feet with a state-of-the-art auditorium, 2 wedding halls, cafeteria, and administrative headquarters. All as a testament to the blessings Lord Ganesha has bestowed upon us and the incredible hard work and cooperation of this community. Before we go into the temple, we want to share a story with you about a miracle that took place here. On September 21st, 1995, people across the globe in places including Bombay, Singapore, London, Nepal started reporting that the Ganeshas in the temple started drinking the milk that was offered to them. Devotees, after hearing this news, started flooding into this temple to see if they could observe this miracle for themselves. And they did. Thousands upon thousands of devotees had the joy of feeding the Lord. As the devotees each offered Lord Ganesha a spoon of milk, he drank it. It was no stone, it was the Lord himself. With that, let's start the tour of the temple. The first thing you see is the Gopuram, the tower, that marks this place as a temple in the city. There are 4 towers or Gopurams, each in the 4 directions. Back home in India, there could be no other building that stood taller than the Gopuram of the temple in that village. The Gopuram is divided into 7 units. 5 of the units stand above the temple entrance. 1 full unit must be used to cover the entrance of the temple, and the final unit exists underground. At the top of the Gopuram, there is a copper pipe that is connected directly to the base, which grounds the temple and protects against lightning. Also, there are kalashams, inverted pots made of 5 metals that are blessed every 12 years when the temple goes through the reconsecration ceremony, known as the Kumbhabhishekam. Starting from these kalashams, the cosmic divine energy is retained within the temple. Here, you are entering through the main entrance, through the Shodasha Ganapati walkway, featuring different forms of Ganesha on either side. This is the main entrance to the temple, because this is where the Dwara Gopuram, or the entrance tower, is located. And straight ahead, you can see the Raja Gopuram, the grand entrance tower. Raja means royal. This will be the largest of all of the Gopurams and denotes the main entrance. This will always be facing the east direction. We believe that even having a glimpse of the Raja Gopuram, even from a far distance, is equivalent to coming into the temple. That's why, back in the day in India, when the temple was the largest structure in the town, people would always try to live in places with a view of the temple, so that they could have the Gopura Darshan daily, meaning the vision of the Gopuram. Here you can also see the Dvajastamba, or the flagpole, and the Balipita, the offering pedestal. This temple was built based on the recommendations of the scriptures, specifically the Silpa Shastras and Vastu Shastras, which detail how a temple should be constructed. A temple is constructed by using the human body as a reference. The main god, the Pradhana Devata, is located near the heart region. The large hall, known as the Mahamandapa, is the central portion of the body, and the Rajagopuram, the main Gopuram, is the feet. This temple is not just a structure with bricks and mortar. It is an energy storehouse. Ancient Vedic chants and age-old rituals are all recited daily and conducted here according to the scriptures, which allows for this cosmic energy to be retained within these walls. This is what makes this place special. Not just the stonework, but the energy. You just feel better when you come here, more rejuvenated. In layman's terms, you get recharged. As I mentioned before, temples are normally dedicated to one main deity, known as the Pradhana Devata, and in this temple, that is Lord Ganesha, whose vehicle is the Mushika, the mouse, as you see right here, looking straight at Ganesha inside, waiting for him. Mushika, the mouse, is the vehicle of Lord Ganesha, as he is a remover of all obstacles. Like the mouse, our mind is constantly wandering from place to place, sometimes mindlessly. If we're able to control our minds like Ganesha controls and rides his mouse, then we can remove all of the obstacles in our life. Thus, we pray to Lord Ganesha to show us how to do that, since he is, after all, the remover of all obstacles. Now we have entered the Mahamandapa, the main hall of the temple. Right in front of us, we see the main shrine of Lord Ganesha, known as the Mulasthanam. He is Sri Mahavallabha Ganapati. Maha means great, and Vallabha means omnipotent. Ganapati means leader of the Ganas, the guards of Lord Sri Shiva. He has a power to remove obstacles and is easily identified by his elephant face, human body with 4 hands and a huge belly. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha. Nirvignam Gurume Deva. Sarva Karyeshu Sarvada. O Lord, with a curved trunk and a huge body and the effulgence of 1 billion suns, always remove the obstacles of all of my undertakings all of the time. There are 5 main sanctums in the temple: Sri Mahavallabha Ganapati, Sri Shiva, Sri Shanmukha with his consorts, Sri Venkateshwara, and Sri Mahalakshmi. The sanctums are made of granite stone. Under each of the sanctums there exists a yantra. Yantra literally means machine. It is a metal plate that generates, preserves, and radiates the cosmic energy that is specific to each of the forms of the Lord. When each of the deities are installed in the temple, a specific yantra corresponding to the frequency of the energy of the form is chosen, blessed, and installed. The stapatis, or artisans, carefully select which stone to use to construct these murtis, or idols. There are more requirements that the stone must fulfill in order to be used for worship. For example, the stone must come from a place that exists near water in nature, so that it is constantly cleaned. It must also be near fire or heat, such as a volcano, so that it burns the stone and makes it ready to be prepared for worship. That is why the color of the stone used for the idols is black, compared to the lighter gray color used for the stonework to build the outside of the temple. These idols also come from places where there is sand, so that as the sand rubs on the stone, it naturally smoothens the surface and keeps it polished. The stapati then selects which stone to use to construct the deity and which to use for the pitam, or the resting plate. They come from 2 different pieces of stone that have 2 different sound frequencies. If you tap a copper coin on each of the stones, different frequency sounds will emanate from each. There is also a gender for each stone, which one is selected to infuse which form of the Brahman to. There are no nails, no cement, no adhesive devices used to keep the structure upright. It's all built according to an interlocking system, an ancient Vedic science. This huge structure is also divided into 3 parts. The first third exists above the temple. The middle third is what you all see here, and the lower third exists underground. Again, all of the stone came from India and was handcrafted by artisans. The dravyas or materials used in the abhishekams or the ritual bathing of the Lord helps maintain the stone's age that allows it to remain intact for thousands of years. Every 12 years, during the reconsecration ceremony known as the Kumbhabhishekam, the divine energy is removed from the stone, repair work is completed, and the divine energy is then reinfused back into the deity. The Om symbol that you find on top of Lord Ganesha signifies the one and only God, the Supreme. It is known as the Sapta Brahman, the phonetic representation of God. Above each of the Pradhana Devatas, you will find the Vimanas, resembling a mountain. Each Vimana is crowned with a golden spire, known as a Kalasha. On the sides of the Vimana, you can find the fierce faces of Yali, the protector of the temple. From the Vimanas and Kalasham to the Yantra below the deity, there is a solid connection that is established and maintained to make sure positive cosmic energy is retained within the space. The placement of these deities are thought out carefully. Our temple is very special for many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is the fact that Lord Shiva is facing Sri Mahalakshmi. This unique placement that is usually not seen in other temples helps explain why so much energy is felt when one enters the temple. Electromagnetic waves spread across the temple in a clockwise direction, which is why devotees offer their prayers and walk around the temple in the same manner, to go in line with the electromagnetic waves and not counter to it. This is what makes this place an energy storehouse. The deities on the side of the temple located in the smaller sanctums are made of a material known as Panchaloha, an alloy of the 5 metals: copper, brass, iron, silver, and gold, all in specific proportions. These are known as Utsavamurtis, festival deities. They are thus taken out of their sanctums during rituals and festivals and placed back into their shrines, unlike the deities made of black stone, which are permanently fixed. This is Sri Hanuman, the divine monkey god, and an ardent devotee of Lord Sri Rama, the 7th avatar of Lord Sri Vishnu. When he opens his chest, you are able to witness the divine darshan of Sri Rama and his consort Sri Sita, signifying how great of a devotee Sri Hanuman is. This is Sri Mahalakshmi, the goddess of wealth, and the counterpart Shakti of Lord Vishnu, the preserver. She blesses us with material wealth, children, good company, etc. This is Sri Durga, the embodiment of Shakti, the divine energy, the goddess of strength and courage. It is believed that she has the combined energies of powerful deities such as Sri Shiva, Sri Vishnu, and Sri Indra. Sri Shiva, usually worshipped in symbol form, linga, and is one of the Trimurtis as well, the destroyer. His vehicle is Sri Nandi, the faithful bull. It is a tradition for Hindus to ask permission from Nandi before praying to Lord Shiva, and sometimes even whispering their prayers into Nandi's ears, trusting that it will go to Sri Shiva without any delay. This is Sri Parvati, the mother of all creation and the goddess of energy. She is the mother of Lord Ganesha and the consort of Sri Shiva. The Atmalinga. This Shiva Linga here is made of white marble. Devotees can perform a mini abhishekam or divine shower with Ganga Jal or water taken from the holy river Ganga. Sri Shanmugha. The sanctum of Sri Shanmugha along with Sri Valli and Sri Devasena, his consorts. Sri Shanmugha is a younger brother of Lord Ganesha. He holds a flag with a rooster as his emblem and the veil, the divine sphere, given to him by his mother, Sri Parvati, to be used as a weapon of war and one that imparts wisdom. Sri Nataraja, the dancing form of Lord Shiva. His right foot is on top of the dwarf demon, which represents ignorance and ego. Sri Sudarshana. The Sri Sudarshana Chakra is a divine astra or weapon and is one of the 5 weapons of Sri Vishnu. If we purify our minds before approaching Sri Sudarshana, we can be empowered to fight our demonic tendencies on our path to spiritual progress. Sri Venkateshwara, also known as Sriman Narayana. He is believed to be able to erase our sins and bless us by granting boons. Hindus take the sacred water, known as the tirtha, and the priest places the dome-shaped shatari on the devotee's head. The shatari has the 2 feet of Lord Vishnu on it, meaning if we wholeheartedly surrender to the Lord, we will be bestowed with the path to liberation. The Yagashala. This is the place of the yaga or fire worship. As was done in the ancient times and still practiced till date, priests sit around the fire pit chanting Vedic mantras and offering items to the Lord by placing it into the fire. It is believed that as the items are burned and smoke rises from the fire pit, those offerings will directly go into the atmosphere and thus directly to God. The fire god acts as a messenger in this process. But the New York Ganesh Temple is also much more than a place of worship. It is also a cultural and educational center that offers classes to young students all the way up to older seniors. Children attend the Ganesh Padashala, the temple school, to learn about the Hindu faith, learn how to sing bhajans, chant, participate in dance and music classes, and also take enrichment classes. The temple also has a young professionals team known as Akshayam that organizes monthly learning series, partake in volunteerism, conduct programs and conferences, etc. The temple organizes monthly cultural programs and features young budding artists in the area and also seasoned professionals to preserve and promote ancient Indian classical arts.
ಧರಿಸಿದ ಪರಮ ವೈಷ್ಣವನು ನೀನೆ ಗರುಡ
temple also has a state-of-the-art auditorium that seats over 700 guests, along with 2 wedding halls and the awesome temple canteen offering New York City's best Indian vegetarian food. So why not stop by at the temple and have a look for yourself? We welcome you all to come visit our temple in person. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at nytemple@gmail.com. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Namaste.
Okay, thank you to the Hindu Temple Society for that very amazing video. And next up, before we have our Q&A, we're going to do a video from the Friends Meeting House, also here in Flushing. So we're going to hear from them and then put any questions that you have for us in the chat, and we'll try and get a chance to answer them for you. So.
Hi, welcome in. Thanks for joining our virtual tour. I'm Jeff Guyton, and I'm the clerk of Flushing Monthly Meeting. And welcome to Flushing Friends Meeting House, which is also known as the old Quaker Meeting House. Thanks for joining us, and we really hope that when COVID is over, you come and physically meet with us and take a tour with us in person. So welcome in, and the first thing you might notice when you enter the gate is the stark contrast between crazy busy Northern Boulevard, and I drove over on the LIE, and then when you enter the meeting house grounds, it's an oasis. It's peaceful, and it's a transition from a very hustle bustle, busy dog-eat-dog world into the very peaceful environs of the Quaker Meeting House. Now, the next thing that you might wonder about, why there's no entrance to the building facing Northern Boulevard. And that's an analogy to Quaker worship, in that the central belief of Quakers is that every human being has an inner light. And when Quakers worship, they sit as a community in silence and they turn inward to receive divine guidance, the inner light. So it makes sense that you'd turn away from the busyness of the world and Flushing Boulevard in order to connect to what Quakers call the divine inner light. John Bound purchased and donated land for this burial ground in 1676. There are over 140 Quakers recorded as being buried here. Prior to 1835, Quakers did not use headstones, so there are many more people buried here than there are stones. John Bound and his family are buried here, as are the abolitionists William Burling and Matthew Franklin. Turning toward the entrance to the meeting house, you may notice a new banner. And aside from the central belief in the inner light, Quakers do not have a creed. Instead, they have testimonies that are sometimes referenced to spices: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. And you have seen on the porch boxes, those are for our CSA food distribution, which takes food from farmers to people, and we do that every Thursday night here at the porch of the meeting house. The belief in the inner light is at the heart of the Quaker belief in equality. And although I mentioned that Quakers turn inward in prayer, they believe that they must then go out into the world to act upon the divine guidance that they've received. The Quaker belief in the inner light and the Quaker testimonies account for the reason that Quakers have been at the forefront of the abolition movement, women's suffrage, the civil rights movements, and the many movements for equality that continue to this day. So we're walking into our worship space now. And here we sit for an hour or more, an hour. Sometimes it's silent, and frequently people may stand and minister from the inner light or what message may come to them through their contemplation. I mentioned that the burial ground was purchased and donated by John Bown in 1676. John Bown's house was built in 1661 and stands just a couple of blocks away. John Bown and John Rodman purchased the land for building the meeting house in 1692, and the first meeting in the meeting house occurred in November of 1694. Quakers held their meetings at John Bown's house for 30 years prior to the building of this meeting house, but some very important events took place prior to building this meeting house. In 1657, a Quaker named Henry Townsend was arrested, imprisoned, and fined for holding Quaker meetings in his home. The area was under the jurisdiction of Peter Stuyvesant, who thought that everyone should belong to the Dutch Reformed Church and had forbidden anyone from holding a Quaker meeting or to host a Quaker in one's home. In response to this persecution, the town clerk, the sheriff, and 28 other settlers drafted a document calling for religious freedom and an end to religious persecution. That document, as you may well know, is known as the Flushing Remonstrance, and it was signed December 27, 1657. The town clerk was jailed and banished, and the other signers were heavily fined. It is worth noting that several signers of this important document later became Quakers. John Bown, whose wife Hannah Feek had become a Quaker, allowed Quaker meetings to take place in his home despite knowing the risks. This led to his arrest in 1662, when he was imprisoned and fined. Being a prisoner of conscience, John Bown refused to pay the fine and refused to leave when his prison door was left open. This led to his banishment. He was put on a boat to Holland, but told that he could get off wherever he wished. After going to Ireland and England, he made his way to Holland, where he met with the representatives of the Dutch West India Company that had granted the charter to establish the settlement at Flushing. There, he presented his case for religious freedom. As a result, the Dutch West India Company sent a letter to Peter Stuyvesant in 1663, ending the persecution of Quakers and establishing the right to religious freedom and freedom of conscience. So the Flushing Remonstrance is seen by many people as a precursor to our Bill of Rights, drafted over 100 years before our Constitution was adopted in 1787. This worship room is the oldest part of the meeting house, which is the oldest house of worship in New York State, and the second oldest in the country that has been in continuous use, which is the miracle to me. That continuous use includes a period when British soldiers occupied this room during the Revolutionary War. The benches are not quite as old as the meeting house because the British soldiers burnt the original benches and a picket fence for firewood. The British soldiers used this room as a stable, a storage room, and as a hospital. The benches are still quite old, and in this close-up, you'll see that the carved graffiti is so old that the initials of this person were carved with serifs at the tips of the letters. You'll notice that the worship room remains simple and unadorned. This is the result of the Quaker testimony of simplicity. For Quakers, there's always been a link between the testimonies of simplicity and peace. In short, it is believed that the desire for luxuries creates a demand for the raw materials needed to produce those luxuries, which in turn leads to the many wars fought, fueled by that need for raw materials. They also saw a connection between luxuries and the exploited labor and the slave labor used to satisfy the appetite for luxuries. It is worth noting that Quakers don't actually consider their meeting houses to be sacred. It's the divine presence that friends share in worship that they consider to be sacred. So early friends were known to meet in fields and homes and during persecution in the woods with the help of Native Americans. Still, this building is an important symbol of freedom. The ceiling was originally open with gallery seating all around. It was enclosed in 1763 in order to create a school upstairs for children whose parents could not afford to pay for schooling. And this happened well before the public school system was established in New York City in 1842. In 1717, the meeting house was enlarged to accommodate more people. This wall consists of panels that could be lowered to accommodate separate meetings and raised to accommodate a very large meeting. Quakerism is remarkable for considering all of its members to be clergy, and women were considered equal to men in their ministry. In the larger world, women had different spheres of activities than men, so the women could meet on that side of the panels when necessary, but the panels could be raised to form one large meeting when needed. As we come out of the worship room, we enter this room, which is now used as a social room. And we can see several displays about Quaker history. And on this wall is a history of peacemakers. We'll focus for a couple of minutes on John Woolman, who is a very important figure in Quaker history. When he was a young man, John Woolman worked as a clerk in a shop. In the course of his work, he was once told to write up a bill of sale for the purchase of a slave. Although he did what he was told, this action preyed on his conscience and helped lead him to become one of the most important abolitionists in the Society of Friends. John Woolman's convictions were so strong that he began to wear undyed clothing because he knew that slaves were made to work on indigo plantations in the production of dyes. He traveled up and down the eastern part of the U.S. visiting Quaker meetings, including Flushing Meeting, to try to convince others that holding slaves was incompatible with Quaker beliefs. In his travels to preach against slavery, John Woolman visited the homes of many fellow Quakers. When visiting Quakers who held slaves, he insisted on either paying for their labor, and if this was not allowed, he'd sleep outdoors in the fields. There's a couple of additional things to note in this room. One is the architectural support that's known as a ship's knee. That's a natural right angle formed between a tree trunk and a branch or a tree trunk and its root. There's one down here, and there are more ship's knees upstairs. And next we have a display case. This is a display that marks the visit of George Fox, the founder of the Religious Society of Friends, to the Bound House in 1672. George Fox preached a sermon under 2 oak trees. Here we have a piece of one of the trees and a piece of the stone marker that replaced the trees, presumably after they withered. It was after a long period of searching that George Fox came to believe that no person needed an intermediary to connect to the divine, and this is at the heart of Quaker beliefs. Here we are on the 2nd floor of the meeting house where the children's meetings are held. You'll note that there are several extraordinarily long white oak beams that span the length of the meeting house. Those hold the roof up. Here are 2 additional ship's knees. It's perhaps fitting to end our tour with a reproduction of the original of the Flushing Remonstrance. The edges were burned in a fire, but thankfully this plea for religious freedom survives today. This document and John Bound's banishment led to the famous response of the Dutch West India Company to Governor Stuyvesant, which stated, "The consciences of men at least ought ever to remain free and unshackled. Both documents are important precursors to the freedom of religion and separation of church and state established in the Bill of Rights. The Flushing Friends Meeting House was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1967 and a New York City landmark in 1978. So I hope that you'll join us in person someday when it's safe to do so. And you'll be welcome to experience a Quaker meeting, then a little bit of coffee and some fellowship afterwards. When COVID is over, we really hope to embrace you in person. For now, you're more than welcome to join us on Zoom on Sundays, and to do so, we worship from 11 to noon, as we always do in person here, and then our fellowship is 12 to 1. So on Zoom now, we worship from 11 to 12, and if you'd like to join us sometime, just the email is jeffreyguyton@hotmail.com. That's jeffreyguyton@hotmail.com. If you email me, I can send you the Zoom link to get on, and we would love to join you for a gathered and spiritually resonant worship experience. Thanks so much for joining us on our virtual tour today, and we look forward to meeting you soon.
Okay. So thank you to everybody who presented a video today. And I know if you guys have any questions, go ahead and type them into YouTube chat. If you are on mobile, you might have to scroll down a little bit to find the chat. Otherwise, it should be on your the bottom right-hand side of your screen if you're on a computer. I have a couple of questions for the Hindu Temple Society of North America. If you guys would be happy to answer those. Are you ready, Robbie?
Yes.
All right. So we can now see you. So one of the things that I noticed during your video is that there's a lot of technology present in the temple. How does technology intersect with the traditions of Hinduism?
There are two kinds. One is, I hope you are talking about the ancient technology or the advanced. Okay. See, Indian Vedic text is a book of science. Okay. So even though the Vedic text, our book of the Bible of ours, also speak about spiritualism and prayer, worship, but more than 80% of our religious utmost text talks about the science and technologies, which will be helpful for our way of life. So there were people who are more than 5,000 years ago, they were very advanced at that time, including launching satellites in those times, because there were even astronomers and mathematicians, scientists, physicists, medicine. You name a profession, you will find it exists. So it's one of the ancient thing. After colonization, okay, they were all taught it's an ancient, means people still think it is still valid today also. Thank you.
And so things like the television screens and the lighting, how do those supplement how the worship happens today?
Okay. So this is to to be tuned in with the COVID thing, where people are not able to come to the temple, or there is a restriction in congregations. So we have to provide facility to the people across the globe to have a glimpse of the temple, because Hindus feel more comfortable when he is present in the house of worship. So this gives them a feeling that they are in the temple. So most every day our worship services are being live streamed through our temple's YouTube and Facebook pages. So we have created all the infrastructure to also pray from home and have a feeling that you are present in the temple.
That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
All right. I also have a question for Liz from the Friends Meeting House. So I'm going to. All right, and now you people can see you. So earlier I mentioned how Quakers got their name. Do you know much about how Quakers transitioned from being a flamboyant group to a very reserved group that they're known for being today?
Quakers did go through this quietist period as they were more accepted in American society. I suppose it had to do with the greater tolerance that came along with their movement and the diversity of other religions. Yeah, it's kind of amazing to think that they were once called that because now they're so quiet and turning inward. Although I must say Quakers are still on the forefront of activist movements for equality. The belief in equality is so absolute in Quakerism that you will very often find them present in today's current movements for freedom. So I hope that answered it.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't see any questions for us just yet in the chat, so I'm going to give you guys a last call before we wrap up for today. But I do want to take this time to say thank you to Ravi and Liz, and also to Souks and all the other sites that we reached out today to have them present, but unfortunately we weren't able to make our schedules work. But I highly encourage you guys to take some time to look around Flushing. You never know what you might find around the corner, and it's worth just exploring. So thank you everybody for coming out to today's program. If you want to see more of what the Queens Historical Society has to offer in terms of programming, please check our website. We've got a silent movie film screening coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that. But other than that, thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Queens Historical Society. We appreciate it.